All right, welcome to the explainer. Today, we are going to follow the energy. Think about it, from the sun to a plant to a tiny little insect all the way up to a hawk soaring in the sky. We're going to trace that incredible path that powers, well, pretty much all life on Earth. We're talking about the food chain. So let's kick things off with a really basic question. When you look outside and you see, I don't know, a plant, an insect, a bird, have you ever stopped to think, where did the energy that keeps them alive actually come from? Where did it all begin? It sounds simple, but the answer is pretty amazing. And here it is. For almost all life here on Earth, the ultimate source of all that energy, it's the sun. That light and heat beaming down on us, that's the powerhouse. It's the battery for pretty much every ecosystem on our entire planet.
Okay, so how do we actually track this flow of energy? Well, scientists use a concept called a food chain. And as you can see here, it's pretty straightforward. It's just the path that food energy takes when it goes from one organism to another. When one thing eats another thing.
Right, but a food chain isn't just some random list of animals. No, it's a very specific, structured sequence. It has different levels, kind of like links in a real chain. And each one of those links represents a step where energy gets transferred. Okay, let's really dig into this diagram here. So each of these steps has a fancy name, a trophic level. And at the very first level, right there at the bottom, we've got the producers. Now, these are the superstars, usually plants, that actually make their own food. They take that sunlight and, through photosynthesis, turn it into energy. They are quite literally the foundation for the whole thing. All right, moving on up to the next level, the second trophic level. Here we find the primary consumers. Think of these as the herbivores, the plant eaters. See, they can't make their own energy like the plants can, so they've got to get it by munching on those producers. So, what's the next link in the chain? That's the third trophic level, the secondary consumers. Now we're talking about carnivores or omnivores, and they get their energy by eating the primary consumers. So that original energy from the sun, it's just been passed along for the second time. And finally, at least in this particular chain, we get to the fourth trophic level, the tertiary consumers. These guys are often the top predators, the ones that eat other carnivores. So you can really see the pattern here, right? Each step up the ladder is just another handoff of that original energy from the sun. Okay, this brings us to a really, really important rule about how this all works. With every single step up that food chain, a huge chunk of energy, we're talking about 90%, is lost, mostly as heat. So that means there's way less energy available the higher you go. It's why there are, millions and millions of grasshoppers, but far, far fewer hawks that can eat them. There just isn't enough energy to support them. And this whole idea, this whole energy transfer rule, it's not just for one specific place. Nope, it applies absolutely everywhere. From a dense forest to the wide open ocean. The players might be different, but the rules of the game are exactly the same. So let's look at a couple of real-world examples. Over here on the left, you've got a classic land-based chain. A plant gets eaten by an insect, that insect gets eaten by a shrew, the shrew by a snake, and then bam, the snake gets eaten by a hawk. Now look to the right at the ocean. It's the exact same pattern, just with different creatures. Tiny phytoplankton are the producers, they're eaten by zooplankton, which get eaten by fish, all the way up to the big boss, the orca. So you see, even though the animals are totally different, a hawk and an orca couldn't be more unalike, the jobs they do in their food chains are identical. This whole structure of producer, primary consumer, and so on, it's like a universal blueprint for how energy gets around in any ecosystem.
Okay, so we've followed the energy all the way up the chain, but what happens when something dies? It doesn't matter if it's the top predator or a plant at the bottom. What happens to all that stuff, the energy and the nutrients locked inside?
Does it all just vanish, poof, gone from the system? Or is there another piece to this puzzle that completes the whole circle? Well, this is where the decomposers come into play. And let me tell you, these are the unsung heroes of every single ecosystem. We're talking about things like bacteria and fungi. They are nature's essential cleanup and recycling crew. What they do is break down all the dead stuff and waste products, and in the process, they release all those crucial nutrients back into the soil or the water. And that is what allows the producers, the plants and phytoplankton, to suck up those nutrients and kickstart the whole energy cycle all over again. They're the ones who close the loop. All right, so now we get the idea of a simple, straight-line food chain. But now I want you to zoom out with me, and let's look at the bigger picture of what's really going on in nature. Because, and this probably won't surprise you, it's a little bit messier than that.
I mean, just think about it for a second. A hawk doesn't only eat snakes, right? It'll happily eat a shrew or some other small animal. And a snake definitely eats more than just shrews. In the real world, everything is way more connected.
So the truth is, these neat little food chains don't really exist all by themselves. In reality, they all overlap and crisscross with each other, and what you get is a big, complex food web. And that gives us a much, much more realistic picture of how energy actually moves around.
And you can see the difference so clearly here. A food chain is just one single path, which is kind of fragile if you think about it. But a food web, that's a complex, tangled network. And that complexity isn't just messy. It actually provides a massive benefit: stability.
Yeah, this complexity is what creates resilience. In a food web, if some disease comes along and wipes out all the shrews, well, the hawk isn't totally out of luck. It can still eat snakes or other things. It has options, right? It's this complicated network of connections that really gives an ecosystem its strength. And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. If a complex web is a strong web, what do you think happens to the entire system when you pull on just one of those threads? What kind of ripple effect would spread through this whole web of life if just one key species suddenly disappeared? All of a sudden, that strong, resilient structure, well, it might just be a lot more fragile than we realized.